Oh, these bags! Oh, hi! You caught me trying to throw out the garbage. Speaking of bags, let's talk about Mark Bagley.
Comic tropes. Comic tropes.
Hello! Welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Today, I want to talk to you about an artist who broke into comics in an utterly unique way. He's maintained a professional career for over 30 years, working at Marvel and DC Comics, and along the way, he co-created the supervillain Carnage in the SpiderMan title. He's noted for his lengthy runs on 4 separate titles, and his name is Mark Bagley. Mark Bagley had a job working as a technical artist at Lockheed Martin in 1983 when his friend convinced him to give one more attempt at his dream of working on comics by giving him the official Marvel Tryout book. This was a 1983 book published by Marvel with a deconstructed comic that allowed writers, illustrators, inkers, colorists, and letterers to work on Spider-Man pages, with the winner being promised an assignment at Marvel. Bagley won the contest, but after not hearing from Marvel for several months, he approached editor-in-chief Jim Shooter at a convention and asked about it. He was assigned work on some of Marvel's smaller titles, like the adaptation of the toy line Visionaries, some fill-in issues on Marvel's experimental New Universe line of comics, and eventually several issues of Strikeforce Morituri. And of course, we've all read Visionaries, and we probably pore over our old back issues at least once a week. But aside from that, I have talked on this channel before about Strikeforce Morituri, and while it isn't his strongest work, I think that you see a lot of the fundamentals in place right from the beginning. He has good storytelling skills panel to panel, and he was good at drawing expressive faces. He was also good at drawing lithe, muscular bodies, which is important work if you want to break into working on superheroes. That said, by his own admission, Bagley's early work was being banged out quickly for a page rate, and it wasn't really getting him noticed. So he deliberately slowed down and took his time on some Captain America backup stories. That ended up getting him noticed. Bagley's big break came in 1990. A few months previously, the team on Thor had introduced a new team of superheroes calling themselves the New Warriors, comprised of existing characters that weren't being used, like Nova, Namorita, Speedball, Marvel Boy, Firestar, and their new creation, Night Thrasher. Marvel assigned writer Fabian Nicieza to do the title as an ongoing. Nicieza took notice of Bagley's work and asked the editor to work with him. Bagley illustrated the first 25 issues. While he hadn't created any of these characters, he worked on each character longer than any previous artist had, and he helped define their looks. Bagley has primarily worked on teenage superheroes in his career, and his artwork suits such characters, as he tends to give his characters big, expressive eyes and not too many lines on their faces, which helps keep them looking young. He seems to specialize in physiques that are leaner, like a swimmer, as compared to bodybuilders. It's worth noting that his line art is certainly detailed, but with longer, smoother strokes than a lot of what was popular at the time, which was stuff by artists like Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, and Jim Lee, who tended to fill their pages with lots of small strokes to add textures. Bagley's artwork is comparatively more open. In interviews, Bagley has said that he admires and is inspired by artists with smooth musculature and plenty of feather-deep shadows instead of lots of cross-hatching, including artists like Mark Farmer and Alan Davis. Ironically, he was putting so much detail into the early issues of New Warriors that he made his inker, veteran Al Williamson, quit. Williamson literally told him it was too much line work. I remember reading New Warriors back in 1990 and 1991, and I enjoyed it. I thought that the characters were very likable and interesting. I don't remember specifically noting the artwork at the time, but I do remember that it was clear, it was easy to understand, the characters were expressive, and it was full of action that was really exciting to look at. So I definitely remember enjoying that book, and the exciting part for Mark Bagley was that he was proving himself to Marvel. So while his artwork could look a little different from issue to issue depending on what inker was working on him, he was delivering a consistent product month after month for 2 years, and it enabled him to transition into a more high-profile assignment. So let's talk about that. In 1991, Spider-Man was still at an all-time high for Marvel. Writer David McFarlane had been on the title for a while, and he had worked with Todd McFarlane, who exploded the book's popularity. McFarlane was followed by Eric Larson, who continued to keep Spider-Man sales high. McFarlane, Larson, and many other of the most popular artists at Marvel then all left to form Image Comics. Marvel needed someone, and Bagley was ready. He briefly worked on both his final issues of New Warriors and Amazing Spider-Man. And while it's impressive for any artist these days to work on 2 monthly titles at once, the final few issues of New Warriors are noticeably sketchier. Working on Amazing Spider-Man made Bagley a mainstream name, and he stayed on the title for 5 years, illustrating more Venom stories than any previous artist, and introducing Venom's spawn, Carnage. There were a lot of stories with Venom and Carnage in Bagley's era, culminating in the epic Maximum Carnage storyline, which crossed over with the other Spider-Man titles at the time. Bagley did very well on that because it featured a lot of characters, and he had a good amount of experience on a team book. Bagley's interpretation of Venom and Carnage seems to be the default take on the characters. He also helped slim Spider-Man down a bit, bringing him a little closer to the original Steve Ditko take. Bagley was also part of the team that worked on the infamous Clone Saga. In that storyline, Spider-Man's presumed dead clone returned, and Marvel spun its wheels for over 2 years, having trouble deciding how to end it. The Clone Saga is a lot to cover, so I plan on doing an episode about just that later this summer. But it was pretty bad because Marvel's original plan was just for something like a 6-month storyline meant to streamline Spider-Man and, cut out a lot of the continuity and the baggage that the character had accumulated over the years. Instead, nobody knew how to end it properly. There was a lot of editorial changes, and the storyline ended up dragging on and on for about 2 years. A lot of different writers and artists were working on it, and it's messy. That said, it is some pretty strong artwork by Mark Bagley during this era, but the overall storyline probably overshadowed that, and his final issues of Spider-Man kind of fizzled out more than going out with a bang. But he was ready for his next challenge at this point in time, and it ended up being something that he had proven himself good at. It was time for him to work on another team book. Writer Kurt Busiek had a big idea for Marvel called Thunderbolts. Kurt had earned the ability to request working with an artist, and he specifically wanted to work with Mark Bagley. And the story of Thunderbolts was very atypical. A new group of superheroes debuts, but the final page of the first issue has a twist that reshapes what the book will be about. Small spoiler approaching for a comic that's over 20 years old. Here it comes. On the last page, we realize that the Thunderbolts are actually all supervillains, specifically a previous team known as the Masters of Evil. The title followed a bunch of supervillains pretending to be superheroes to ultimately gain access to government secrets and the public's trust, but along the way, most of them learned that they prefer being heroes to villains. Each of the characters is a complete re-envisioning of the supervillains, and had to work as both a disguise and an appropriate look for their existing powers. One of the most complex designs was redoing the Beetle as Mach 1, but Songbird's new look from Screaming Mimi is also a standout. It's worth noting why Busiek wanted Bagley, since we're discussing his art style. Busiek frequently works on mainstream superheroes, but he doesn't tend to select artists with a flashy style, instead opting for artists with good storytelling skills that can accurately represent his stories. That's why he's worked with guys like Brent Anderson on Astro City or George Perez on Avengers. Minus a few fill-in issues, Bagley remained on the title through issue 51. Along the way, the writer changed from Busiek to Nicieza in issue 34, reuniting Bagley with his New Warriors cohort. He also went through a change in the team's status as their former villainous pasts became public knowledge, and the superhero Hawkeye stepped in as their new leader in an attempt to help them with rehabilitation. There were also several inkers that filtered through. Bagley refined and locked in his style at this point, and it tends to be cartoony faces that are expressive, good panel-to-panel storytelling so that larger panels slow down the pace with dialogue, and smaller panels express fast-paced action, punctuated with huge panels full of a lot of action and characters. But his best talent as an artist is probably his ability to convey character emotions with body language, something he nailed in his next big project. For his next project, Bagley used a bit of everything that had come before. His ability to draw convincing teenagers from the New Warriors, his expressive body language and storytelling techniques that he'd picked up on Thunderbolts. And oh yeah, his 5 years on SpiderMan were very important because his next job was back on SpiderMan, but it was a new version. In 2000, Marvel decided to start new versions of some of their popular superheroes, with an all-new beginning and no previous continuity or crossovers. This was the Ultimate Universe. Writer Brian Michael Bendis, then relatively new at Marvel, and Mark Bagley were selected to create Ultimate Spider-Man, starting where Lee and Ditko had started about 40 years earlier. But this new version would be set in the modern day and take its time, allowing Peter Parker to stay a teenager. Together, Bendis and Bagley set a new record as the longest-serving collaborative team on a Marvel title, with 111 consecutive issues, over 9 years, beating the previous record set by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby on Fantastic Four. The plan had originally been for just a 6-issue limited series, but the duo clicked, and Bagley had fun reimagining classic Spider-Man villains like Doc Ock, Venom, Green Goblin, and many more. It showcases some of Bagley's best work, incredibly expressive stuff. The panels of Peter Parker expressing extremely joyful discovery, hurt feelings, or incredible pain and guilt are shared in equal measure. And his version of Spider-Man is subtly different from the older version he'd illustrated a decade prior. This Spider-Man has a smaller body, and maybe a bigger head, or at least proportionally larger. The run on Ultimate Spider-Man is remarkably consistent. If you don't like it, you'll probably never like it. But if you do like it, there's a lot of it to like. It's funny, it's emotional, it's some of Mark Bagley's best artwork, no question. That said, perhaps because of the fact that the book was so clearly set in then modern context, not all of it has aged well. A lot of the teen characters Bagley draws seem to dress in more 90s fashions. Bleach blonde, dyed, bowl cut haircuts, overall pants, long flannel shirts. It's all on display. Phones are bulkier and less present. People are amazed that Peter Parker knows how to code web pages, so he's instantly hired to run the Daily Bugle's website. It isn't cringe-inducing, but you'll definitely take note of the era it was created in. Ultimate Spider-Man was very influential. The relationship with Peter and Harry inspired the story across the original Spider-Man trilogy of movies. The monstrous look of Green Goblin found its way into the Amazing Spider-Man duology. If there is a knock against Bagley, the most frequent criticism seems to be that his faces can often look the same. There's some truth to that, but I think it's also something that the majority of comic book artists struggle with. So if a character can be given a unique costume, expressive posture and gesture, and the storytelling is clear panel to panel, the artist can still make for an easy-to-read, enjoyable story. Bagley has said in interviews that the elements he struggles with the most are automobiles and crowd scenes, but to be fair, those are usually a challenge for every artist. Personally, I would love to see Mark Bagley tackle something other than superheroes. I think it would be very interesting to see him do, say, crime or science fiction. I could see him doing some great work in those areas. But it seems that his interests just don't lie there. He likes doing superhero stuff, and primarily his work has been with Marvel. Now, he did do about 3 years where he went to DC, and his work there isn't bad, but he also did not make a huge impact. Sometimes I wonder if that may be due to the fact that Marvel and DC have very different ways of dealing with comic book scripts and editorial oversight. Really, only Mark Bagley could tell us that. I think that, how much you appreciate Mark Bagley's artwork is obviously going to be in the eye of the beholder. Your mileage may vary, but I do like it, and I think that it's because you can count on certain things. There's consistency, that's always there. You can count on him being on a title for quite a while, usually. There's also the fact that he's very energetic and expressive. His pages are fun to look at, they're exciting. And finally, there's readability. He tells a very clear, easy to understand story panel to panel. That's important for any comic book artist as compared to just a pin-up artist, a splash page artist, a cover artist. Who knows? He draws comic books, sequential panels. That's about everything I've got to say about Mark Bagley this week, but that said, let's take a look at what fan art came in this week. George Giparu returns with a pitch for Dark Knight 6. In this one, apparently I am Supergirl, and an 80-year-old Batman is complaining that I need to get off his lawn. It's beautiful artwork, and you can see more of George's artwork at his website. Ethan DeBoard delivers this beautiful illustration of myself and Infotron. You can find more at Ethan's Instagram handle. Artist MX delivered this very shiny piece with me holding a spoon, obviously inspired by my recent Tick review. You can see more of MX's stuff at his Instagram. Waylon Weaver returns with a beautiful version of the Tick, and you can see more on his Instagram account. Alex Aronowicz illustrated this awesome piece of me as Hellboy. Oh, I love that. What a great idea. Thank you so much. Flare Pie sends in a very unique idea, myself as a Magic the Gathering collectible card. I think that looks like a very effective card. Thank you. Billy Robinson has a very different interpretation. He has me cast as Leatherface, but I love horror movies, so I love it. Thanks, Billy. Wiley Parkhurst sends in this version of myself as the demon, specifically the demon Etrigan, because I'm saying a poem. Oh hi, you caught me doing some necromancy. Now let's look at a comic that I think you might fancy. Finally, Dimension Rock sends in this amazing illustration that has tons of references to past episodes that I've made, so that is a lot of fun. I especially like seeing myself as a Lego. Thank you. Folks, if you would like to have your artwork featured on this channel, as long as it has something to do directly with comic tropes, just send it into this email address, comictropes@gmail.com, and I'm happy to feature it. And then on top of that, I will put a bunch of numbers that all correlate to the names of the people that submitted artwork. I'll drop them in this bag, shake it around, and I'll draw a winner who will get a Gachapon prize that I picked up in Japan. It comes from us out of the Gachaponi machine, which was donated to us by Lunar Shine Store. All right, it looks like this week, number nine. So that's Dimension Rocks. Dimension Rocks, I will get your contact information. Let's take a look at what you won. I love that sound. All right, it's always hard to figure this out, but I do see the word Bandai in there and something very colorful. So I'm pretty sure this is a chibi version of some sort of Gundam. I'm pretty sure this is some sort of a robot that you can assemble, a really tiny one. That's fun. That's cool. Gin. All right, dear viewer, this is the time of the show where I mention thank you so much for supporting the show. Subscriptions continue to rise. I'm getting plenty of likes. Very happy to see all the interaction on the different social media channels. And just so that you know, you can also support this show on Patreon or through Ko-fi. If you want to support the show on a monthly basis, that's why I've got Patreon with reward tiers as low as $1. Or if you're in the mood to just do, say, a one-time tip, that's why I've got Ko-fi. I don't mean to smash you over the head with it or anything, but sometimes that's just the way things go. Ooh, that actually kind of hurt. I'm feeling a little woozy. But before I go, just know I love you all. I think you're great, and I've got some good stuff coming up in the future. Until next time, keep reading comics. I don't mean to smash you over the head with it or anything, but sometimes that's just the way things go. Ooh, that actually kind of hurt.
I don't mean to smash you over the head with it or anything. Sometimes that's just the way things go.